Greetings.
Hi.
This is Thinking Like a Lawyer.
It sure is.
Yeah, the weekly podcast that we put on here at Above the Law. I'm Joe Patrice.
Hi, Joe Patrice.
Hi, that's Catherine Rubino.
Also of Above the Law.
Right, yeah, I think at this point that's kind of assumed. Chris Williams is here too. He's just not said anything yet.
You know, manners. Just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Thank you.
I'm fully on Catherine's side. I did that just for the reaction.
Somebody had to say it.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't you, though.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a little bit of small talk here before we get into the real subject matter of the week, which was a busy week. What all are people up to of interest to them?
I went swimming this weekend. It was actually nice. There was still rain, but it didn't dominate the weekends the way I feel like it has tended to in the Northeast. So that was exciting for me. I actually got to use my pool. That was good times.
I was going to say that the exciting thing was last week we had, from a business perspective, we had a little quasi-editorial retreat where we all got together for the day. So we were all in one room, which
you don't understand the point of small talk. It's not to talk about work. It's to talk about personal
I'm
issues.
not talking about legal stories. I'm talking about our lives. See,
yeah, I will say.
Work
again,
is distinct
Catherine,
from
I'm glad somebody else said it.
Work is absolutely distinct from the subject matter of this show. This show is not a behind the scenes look at how we do our jobs. It's about the law. And
okay, so I'm just waiting for the small talk section where somebody's like, yeah, you know, on the weekend I just had lunch with Clarence Thomas. Like, no, this still work related.
And again, like, I don't have enough money for that.
Wow.
You have at least $13. The price is going down.
Is it? Anyway. But yeah, so it was nice. We all were able to get together with something increasingly less happening in the post-pandemic world. So
it's the first time, actually.
True.
That we all
for the first time, I think all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's been 2 years. I think we've been here for 2 years already.
Yeah, probably close to
first time in
It's
2 years.
2023,
Yeah.
so
Well,
wild.
Yeah. So
How about you, Chris?
Oh well, I went to Jamaica for the first time. Wasn't the best occasion. It was for a funeral. There was a death in the family.
Sorry.
But all places considering, it's a good place to go. You know, the views were beautiful. The water was a color I didn't know water could be.
Yeah.
You could barely tell about the pollution because of globalization or whatever. I had some jerk chicken in Jamaica for the first time. I realized that I've been lied to. Every other jerk I've had has been a pale imitation. It was beautiful. Expensive as hell. Very expensive. Just a couple, there for maybe really 3 days. Spent like $300 just going to and fro and getting food. But
yeah. Well, that's part of the problem with doing it at the last minute too. Like those are the sorts of places where if you've bought your tickets long in advance, it's a little bit easier.
I'm not talking about the flight. I'm talking about the cost of food. I'm talking about the cost of travel, the things that, I was, like I said, in those 3 days, I was talking about, it's okay. But yeah, the flight was expensive, but we had a little bit of time to plan out. It wasn't a last minute flight, super last minute, but the jerk cost some money.
Yeah.
Well, at least it was worth it.
Oh yeah.
It's worse when you spend the money and it's mediocre food.
Also got repeatedly mistaken for Rastafarian, which was interesting. For those who don't know, listen to the podcast. I'm black. No, I have dreads. That's the reason. And a couple people were like, Ross, respect. I'm like, oh, okay. This is just kind people. No, I was like, I'm not nearly as religious as you think I am. But no, that was a fun experience.
Well, it seems like jerk is going to come up a lot during this podcast because we're going to a different kind of jerks will come up. So let's conclude our small talk and go on to a conversation. A big story of last week, a pair of big stories, two high traffic stories hit out Above the Law, both involved the same person. And Catherine, you were on our Aileen Cannon beat.
I was. She, listen, the spotlight has turned pretty sharply on her, right? It started when she inserted herself into the Mar-a-Lago search warrant case. And even though she got bench slapped pretty severely by the 11th Circuit, she's also the judge that is handling the document indictment that Donald Trump is facing. So there's a lot to think. There's a lot of reasons to think that she is going to continue to be in the spotlight. And a bunch of intrepid reporters have found out other mistakes that she's made.
Oops.
It's not just this 11th Circuit bench slap that's kind of out there, hanging out there, and they're all problematically, I think, for what's about to happen, all in criminal cases. And yeah, like, oh, if only.
All right, so what'd she do?
Well, in one of the cases, in the jury instruction form, she didn't ask the jury whether or not the defendant was guilty or not guilty. There are a series of
That seems like a pretty fundamental
Isn't that kind of
one.
like a basic thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is the problem. There's a series of yes or no questions. Did the defendant do this act, which is, part of the predicate, whatever, but never fundamentally asked, is this person guilty or are they not guilty? The lawyer in the case is appealing and says, I've never seen such a easy technical error kind of thing. And it was a contested, the jury form was contested, and she went ahead with her version of the verdict form, despite the fact, there's professors who were opining on, like, I've never seen something quite like this, where we don't actually ask whether or not the defendant is guilty or not guilty. So, it's not great. That's not great. She's also neglected to swear in a prospective jury pool. Not great. She also, in a case, closed the courtroom to the family and general public, and it's now under appeal before violating the defendant's constitutional Sixth Amendment rights to a public trial.
Right.
These are the types of things you wouldn't expect from a person with her vast, jury experience, which is why she was recruited, right? Because she's been doing this for a very long time.
So yeah, I mean, look, we're talking about judges who don't have a lot of experience, which is what happened towards the end of the Trump administration. There was a lot of bottom of the barrel to try and get people who could quickly get on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
The Sixth Amendment one's actually, weirdly, while it might be the most significant in substance, it's also the one that worries me the least, just because
there's no Sixth Amendment issue in the Trump case.
No, just because that's a contestable issue. Like that happens from time to time. There's case law on like when it is and isn't acceptable to close a courtroom, and it's a mistake that a judge could make or not make. It may not be a mistake, depending on the standards that apply in the context.
Well, she didn't
whatever.
even let like the defendant's family in the courtroom, which I think is, people are saying, she at least could have made some overtures, and in fact seemed to operate as if she was unaware that the Sixth Amendment, provides a right for a public trial.
Yeah, it's possible that she just has no clue what the case law surrounding this are, but the issue is that is an issue that is, colorable arguments could be had on all sides. The other two, while they seem way more technical, I think my assumption is we figured out who was guilty and who wasn't, whether or not it was on the form. And I figure everybody knew they were supposed to tell the truth, even if they weren't sworn in. But even though those substantively don't seem as big a deal, they speak to a laziness
Yes.
that is a little more disconcerting, and possibly more disconcerting than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
This is somebody who is new on the job, knows they're new on the job, and like you almost expect something like that to happen more for somebody who's been doing it so long that they kind of forget to follow procedure. When you're new, if you as a new person are ignoring basics like this and showing kind of a lazy disinterest in learning the basics, that's a way more damning thing in my mind.
It also it strikes me, also particularly I think the jury instruction, the verdict form issue, more also just that she's very confident in her wrongness, right? Because this was a contested issue. The defense counsel had asked for, the question of guilt to be put on the jury form, and she was like, I'm happy with the jury instructions, the jury verdict form as I've written it. And why not? I mean, that seems to be a lot of sort of the legal academic response to what is the downside to asking that additional question? The risk is that this is overturned, albeit potentially just on a technicality, but it's potentially overturned by appellate courts because you never asked the jury that had been impaneled whether or not this person was guilty. You put it on the question on the form. It's not like if they, it was a guilty verdict, whether it wasn't like they would have been somehow confused if it's like, is this person guilty as well as the sort of predicate elements of the crime? That wouldn't have increased the difficulty at all. It was like she's so confident in the way that she's done it that she refuses to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really weird with jury forms like that because you're getting them from all the sides.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting proposed ones. And, if you're a judge, I mean, most of these judges just take whatever the prosecution says. But if you're being a conscientious judge, you're blending the two and taking stuff here and there. It seems as though she just kind of said, I have my own, which is bold, as you put it, confident for somebody who doesn't have any clue what they're doing.
Yeah, and who got the raw end, not the raw end, but got told the business by the 11th Circuit. Mm-hmm. You'd think that she might be a little bit more circumspect in realizing what she doesn't know at this point, especially, that particular case, I guess it's not a ton of public publicity about until she became the story. She is the story. Everything now becomes reviewable and everything becomes of interest now.
Yeah.
And my thing is, I think this is really a good hats off moment to Trump because this is at least the second time that he's had a high profile judge that didn't know their amendments. I think of this with her not being familiar with the sixth and Amy Coney Barrett not knowing all the parts of the first.
All the first.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and also he put multiple people on the bench who the ABA ruled were not qualified. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, the ABA's qualification provisions are as close to a rubber stamp as you can get.
I mean, the bar is on the floor here, and half of these people
and they brought shovels.
I mean, not to diss the ABA, and people point out that judges like Cannon were qualified, and it's like, yeah, but the problem is the ABA for so many years operated on this qualified, well-qualified, not qualified trio. And well-qualified meant you were actually like good at this job. But qualified was very much the bare minimum. Like you've seen a case, you've understand a case. I guess you can run this thing. But multiple people were ending up not qualified in that last administration and got put on the bench anyway.
So the ABA adopted the Harvard grading model?
It was the Yale model. It was like not pass, and they got in anyway. But yeah, so, and that also sparked a political movement of senators saying that we should get rid of the ABA's role entirely because they got upset that the ABA kept pointing out these judges weren't qualified.
Yeah.
Yeah, which... Yeah. Anyhow.
And I mean, Cannon did have, I think it was 4 criminal trials experience in the DOJ's office, local office, before being appointed to the bench. But, if you're not involved in all the aspects and haven't, run the cases from, different perspectives, that doesn't necessarily mean that you know all the ins and outs of all this.
Yeah.
I mean, fifth time's a charm. She doesn't get it now.
Hey, Guy, what's up?
Just having some lunch, Conrad.
Hey, Guy, do you see that billboard out there?
Oh, you mean that guy out there in the gray suit?
Yeah, the gray suit guy.
Order up. There's all those beautiful, rich, leather-bound books in the background.
That is exactly the one. That's J.D. McGuffin at law. He'll fight for you!
I bet you he has got so many years of experience.
Like decades and decades. And I bet he even went to a law school.
Are you a lawyer? Do you suffer from dull marketing and a lack of positioning in a crowded legal marketplace? Sit down with Guy and Conrad for Lunch Hour Legal Marketing on the Legal Talk Network. Available wherever podcasts are found.
So the next, I guess we've talked a little, we've kind of made mention of Clarence Thomas and lunches and stuff. So Clarence Thomas, there's been more.
Honk.
There's more that's come out. This slow burn of Clarence Thomas's finances continues. There's multiple billionaires involved, multiple vacations.
Yeah, I think he's gotten 38 paid for vacations by billionaires, which were not reported on any disclosure form.
Right. But the one that seemed the most interesting is, speaking of Hong Kong, Clarence Thomas has very famously touted his everyman status by saying that, he doesn't take these luxury vacations. Turns out he does. He instead every summer hops in the RV and trucks across the U.S., seeing America from the road, like the open road. It's his American dream.
RVs are wildly expensive. The average American cannot afford one.
Well, and as it turns out, the average Supreme Court justice can't afford an RV, because the revelation is that Clarence Thomas did not actually buy this RV himself.
Of course he didn't.
Bought it. He had, at least at some point, a very, very wealthy friend of his who is a healthcare executive financed this for him. The report claims, all that we really have is that they managed to get a hold of the wealthy executive who said that the loan was just a loan and the loan was satisfied. That is pointedly not saying it was paid off. It could mean that, but
it's
it's like
forgiven.
This is like the Aaron Rodgers, I'm immunized, rather than saying I got the vaccine kind of moment, right? And we all know how that one turned out. This is saying it was satisfied, leaves open very much the possibility that a year later he said, hey, you know what, don't worry about it, and then functionally bought an RV for Clarence Thomas. So regardless of whether it was paid off or not, none of this was disclosed. This is something that was only discovered by people running title searches on the house, on the mobile home. And there we are.
I think I'd be more surprised if we went 2 weeks in a row without an update to the Clarence Thomas ethics scandal. And I kind of am of two minds of it. One, are people just getting so kind of immunized to the notion of the ethics problems on the court that it no longer matters? Or is this sort of the slow, snowball running down the hill as it picks up more and more steam? And are we actually going to get some sort of impact, whether it's ethics, ethics provisions with teeth? Is it, obviously Democrats are calling for Thomas's resignation. Not that will happen, because it's not going to happen. Yeah, that's not how corrupt people act.
Yeah, corruption usually doesn't self-police.
Yeah.
This is a weird sentence to say, but I'm just very thankful that Clarence Thomas is a Republican judge. I just imagine if a black Democrat judge got caught doing an eighth of this, that'd be the end. That'd be the end. Yeah.
They would have banned the Supreme Court.
They would have banned Pepsi. They would have banned soft drinks off of Anita Hill straight up if he
Yeah, I think that we have to get a little more time and to discover whether it kind of goes which way it goes, but it could get worse. Mm-hmm. The result of this could be that ethics on the court get worse, because if none of this is actionable, what is there to stop any justice in the future from doing anything?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear Alito's been involved in shady stuff already. Mm-hmm. He's admitted to it in his insane rambling op-ed. With that said, you've got to think that he's more emboldened now than ever to keep doing it. It's not a great times, but so the RV, it turns out it wasn't the Horatio Alger success story that Thomas kind of plays it up to be.
Yeah, and that organization actually is where he met a number of the billionaire buddies that are buying him all sorts of trips.
Yeah, it's almost like that society doesn't, its name doesn't really reflect the kind of absurdist.
I think that's fair.
Horatio Alger spirit. Well, so anything more on Clarence's?
I mean, I don't know.
We'll be back in a week with more stuff.
Yeah. If we think of something, we can definitely bring it up in the future. But what else is there to say?
Yeah. What gets me about it all is how I just don't understand why the disclosure was such a high bar for this guy. Like, I took a loan from a guy I'm willing to call a personal friend, is, pretty easy one to disclose. It's the cover-up's worse than the crime moment. I don't know as though that's true here because the crime looks pretty bad. But the cover-up on some of these, that's what gets me about this, is because this one could have been defended pretty easily, because this isn't a billionaire who's likely to have a bunch of business before the court. This is somebody whose relationship with him predates him joining the bench. This is something he could have said, and it's characterized as a loan. Mm-hmm. He could have pretty easily said, I took a loan from my buddy, and shown that he paid it off, and nobody would have cared.
Yeah, I think that for a long time, the court operated in relative anonymity, right? I think that most justices, for the majority of our lives, most justices would not be recognized except for legal nerds, and I don't think the average American would have recognized a lot of them. And I think that they kind of, know who's going to find out. Yeah. They only will know if I tell them. And there were stories when Stephen Breyer and Ruth Bader Ginsburg had disclosed various trips that they had taken that were paid for by, I think RBG took a trip to Israel and was paid for by some group there, and she disclosed it, and there was a bunch of articles written at the time and uproar about, she's taking this trip, blah, 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 blah. And that probably seemed worse than just pretending like it didn't happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, well. I assume Clarence Thomas is on the road right now in that podcast, listening to podcasts in his RV. So if he's listening,
honk.
Yeah. All right. So finally, it is an annual tradition around these parts. Alan Dershowitz wants you to know that no one likes him on Martha's Vineyard.
So sad.
Yeah.
So sad. Where is my...
Yet again, this is a trend. He's been doing this now basically every summer. He goes on some willing network, whether it's Fox or Newsmax in this instance, to share that no one likes him on Martha's Vineyard.
Don't go back then.
Yeah. I mean, there's a simple solution to this.
You don't have to go to Martha's Vineyard. It's not actually required. Yeah. I don't know if that Harvard law professor is aware that the majority of people don't go to Martha's Vineyard.
Well, so at first it was that because he blames being involved in the first Trump impeachment for this, seemingly glossing over the whole, thinking Jeffrey Epstein didn't deserve to have the plea deal he had and all the sweetheart one, or the stuff that he's been doing with the MyPillow guy. So whatever it is, he first blamed that for why he wasn't going to the good parties on Martha's Vineyard anymore. The next year, he complained that the library did not invite him to give a speech.
People don't like what you stand for, dude.
Well, it's also why would the library be obligated to give you a platform? Like they've done it in the past. They chose not to this time. Who cares? That now his latest complaint is the local book fair did not have any of his books.
Are you kidding me?
No, that is actually the complaint this time. The local Martha's Vineyard book fair does not have any books, even though Dershowitz says he's written more books than any of these people, probably. He has no real basis for that. He just says that.
Because of capitalism. They don't sell well in Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah. It is very difficult to sell somebody on the idea of a legal analysis book from somebody who just got sanctioned to the Stone Ages by a court in Arizona. So maybe there's a reason other than they just don't like you that this is happening. But my takeaway on it was more, put aside the hubris at all of the typical Dershowitz nonsense. It just was it speaks in a more fundamental and serious way to what I think is a pernicious problem. And that is these people who think that what free speech means is everyone's obligated to indulge your opinion. Mm-hmm. It is not, no one is putting him in jail or persecuting him for his opinions, but they also don't invite him to their personal parties anymore. And that's
people don't have to like you. The First Amendment does not guarantee that you have friends.
Yeah. And this is the thing. And I think it speaks, this is his take here, but it's happening elsewhere. I think it is at the root of a lot of these quote unquote free speech arguments we've been having on law school campuses, where the complaint seems to be protesters. I mean, at first they started saying like they were shouting down folks, which would be, the sort of thing that you can have regulations against. But then when it starts coming out that the complaint is they had a protest outside the building and all. Now, at that point, you start running into this is not these kind of free speech, quote unquote, free speech complaints are, we think you should have to sit quietly and listen to us. And that is not how the amendment works. And it is really dangerous in the long term for a society to think that everyone's obligated to indulge everyone's opinion, because indulging everyone's opinion by definition means stifling the opposite opinion. And at a certain point, that becomes the actual violation of free speech. So no, all you get to do is have your opinion. You don't get to be liked for it. You don't get to be indulged with it. You don't get a platform automatically given to you. That's just not how any of this works.
That's not how this works at all.
The most annoying thing is there's this school of them, mostly not people like Dershowitz, who I assume would know better than this. There's a school of armchair lawyers who on social medias who always point out, well, actually giving people platforms is part of the First Amendment, and they cite this one case for it, which is worth talking about, because it says, like, it has language in it like a freedom to speak also implies a freedom to be listened to, but the issue in that case was about whether or not the federal government could deny visas to academics from Europe who had said socialist things. And the argument was, no, you can't do that. They said, and the government's take was, oh, well, they can say whatever they want, but we don't have an obligation to give them a platform here. And in that instance, they said, well, yes, you do. That wasn't to say the federal government is, has an obligation to order schools to invite those academics. It was just, you can't turn away their visas. But this line gets cropped out of context in all of these social media fights that I keep having. It's worth discussing, like a little con law lesson for people.
Yeah, you don't have to listen.
Yeah. Personal advice, use their block button. I wouldn't entertain that.
I mean, I tend not to block people.
Because that's just a dumb conversation to be locked in.
I don't block people. I actually follow a bunch of like radical right-wing accounts, even largely because I like to see what they're all saying. I feel like as awful as it is sometimes, I feel like I need to know what the fringe Nazis are saying, just so that I'm prepared for it,
Just read Alito's Wall Street Journal articles.
Yeah, it's true. Well, thanks everybody for listening. You should subscribe to the show so you get new episodes when they come out. You should leave reviews, write something. It all helps. Stars, it's great. You should be listening to The Jabot, Catherine's other show. I'm a guest on the Legal Tech Week Journalist Roundtable. You listen to all the other shows that we aren't on the Legal Talk Network. You should be reading Above the Law so that you read these and other stories before they find their way onto this show. Follow us on the various social medias at the X's, I guess.
Stop.
I'm
awful.
at Joseph Patrice. She's Catherine1. Chris is at Rights for Rent. Above the Law is at ATL Blog. At Blue Sky, I'm at Joe Patrice. Catherine is also Catherine1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just got a chance to be less formal, so I got to be just Joe Patrice as opposed to Joseph. Yeah.
You can find me on Blue Sky at Joseph Patrice.
right. Yeah. Are you on that yet, Chris?
No, I don't know if I have an invite.
All right. Okay. I'll work on that for you. All right. And with that, we're good. All right. Bye.
If you're a lawyer running a solo or small firm and you're looking for other lawyers to talk through issues you're currently facing in your practice, join the Unbillable Hours Community Roundtable, a free virtual event on the third Thursday of every month. Lawyers from all over the country come together and meet with me, lawyer and law firm management consultant Christopher T. Anderson, to discuss best practices on topics such as marketing, client acquisition, hiring and firing, and time management. The conversation is free to join, but requires a simple reservation. The link to RSVP can be found on the Unbillable Hour page at LegalTalkNetwork.com. We'll see you there.